Welcome to the Rich and Purpose Transform Childhood Trauma Summit. Today we're here with Paula Wiese. She's a certified trauma care practitioner with over 30 years in special education. As the big sister of a brother with disabilities, she understands the quiet burden siblings often carry. She now supports families with siblings in healing from isolation, guilt, and identity loss with a gentle, deeply empathetic approach. Welcome, Paula.
Hi, Jamie. Great to be here.
Well, Paula, it's so good to have you here. This is a topic that we don't talk about a lot, and I'm so happy that you agreed to be a part of our summit. But Paula, we know that a lot of the work that you do is related, it goes back to your childhood. So tell us a little bit about what it's like to be a sister, that's a sister and a caretaker for your brother.
Well, it was difficult a lot of the time, actually. When I was born, I was the oldest, and I was the apple of my parents' eye. We didn't have a lot of money, but my parents they did love me, and they thought I was the greatest thing in the world. And then my brother came along, and because of his disability, the focus shifted from me to him. And I know in typical families, when the new baby comes along, there's a brief temporary time when the shift focuses from the oldest child to the next child. The new baby gets all the attention, but that new baby became the focus of attention for the rest of his life. And it was difficult to make that change. When I was 3 was when he was born. When I was 3, he became my baby. Actually, I had a little doll in one hand and him in the other. I started caring for him. We lived on a farm, so my parents were outside, taking care of the chores. Which, if you don't know about farming, they had to take care of the animals and do the field work and all that kind of thing. And so somebody had to be in the house taking care of the kids. Well, that turned out being me, and I was taking care of my brother. They had taught me how to run for help if I needed to get help, that sort of thing. But that's a lot of burden to put on a 3-year-old, 3.5-year-old. Actually, I guess I was 4 because I was 3.5 when he was born. They didn't really leave me alone with him until he was about 6 months old. So I'd say 4 is probably more accurate, but still, that's a lot for a 4-year-old. But I thought it was big stuff. I really did. I thought it was big stuff and it felt important to me. But it wasn't long before that feeling of importance became more of a burden. Um, when he was diagnosed at the age of 5, I would have been 8. So I was going with him to his therapy, his speech therapy. I would tag along. I was in therapy with him. And I would, when we got home, then do the flashcards, do the worksheets with him so that I could help him learn to talk. Um, so I was like his kind of a teacher and caretaker at the same time. And in fact, when I went to college, I thought I wanted to be a speech therapist. Again, following up on that's what I knew. And I got a lot of praise for that as a child. So that was kind of how I felt I was getting love and attention was for doing that. And so as an adult, I thought that would be a good thing to do. When I went into the speech therapy as a career, I didn't like it. So then when I decided I didn't want to do it, my parents were not happy. So that's a whole conversation, another conversation. But anyway, I'm going to shift back. So as a child, again, because my parents couldn't be there as much for me or for him, actually, as they might have been, because we didn't have a lot of resources. And not only just because of the money thing, but resources just didn't exist back in those days. My parents were actually told to put him in an institution because they said he would not grow up to be a productive adult. So they said, just put him in an institution. My parents said no. And so the resources didn't exist. We did have family close. We had a lot of close by family, but I mean, he was hard to care for. And as he got older and he got big very quickly, he outsized me very quickly. He threw temper tantrums. He was self-harming. These were all things that I couldn't deal with. My parents didn't really know how to deal with. And he knew how to push my buttons. He knew how to torment me. Like I said, we lived on a farm in a very old farmhouse with no insulation. So we lived with the mice. And I was terrified of those rodents, and he knew it. So he would catch them and chase me with them. He would chase me with boards and broom handles and knives. Anything that would terrify me, he would do. So that was definitely traumatic in and of itself. But that was kind of my life. So at the age of, and I was also at the age of 8, my mom said, okay, here's the deal. You're old enough now. You have a decision to make. You can either be outside helping your dad with the chores, or you can be inside and you can take care of the house. And anybody that knows me knows I am not an outside person. I picked the house. She said that's good because I like the outside stuff. So she did all the chores and stuff outside with dad. So she spent most of her day outside every day. And I did the house. I did the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, and I took care of my brother. He did go outside occasionally to do stuff with dad, but he was inside most of the time too.
What was your brother's disability? And then another question after that is that how does someone with a disability get the understanding, I guess, of that you don't like certain things, and they would follow you around with them. How does that kind of happen when someone is really kind of the only person they know almost that takes care of them is you? Why do you think in your mind that with the disability would then kind of chase you around and kind of make you unhappy?
Okay, well, first of all, he was diagnosed back in the day with a word that we don't use anymore. He was diagnosed as mentally retarded, which is now known as intellectual developmental disability. That's the correct term now. And actually, he did develop to the point where he could read at about a 3rd grade level. So he could read. So he was smarter than people gave him credit for. But he was very manipulative. He just knew how to read the system, I guess, understand what was going on. And I think it's just intuitive. People know if they see you're afraid of something or something bothers you, they just can use that to their advantage. And I don't think that's a matter of how smart you are. I think it's just an intuitive, like a survival instinct. It's what he did for his own maybe survival to gain an advantage in his system.
We look at it more as a survival technique from him rather than deliberately kind of trying to be mean.
Well, I mean, I do think it was deliberate, um, but I think it was something that he was able to do because we do by nature do what we need to do to survive. And for him, he felt the need to gain an advantage in a situation where he really didn't have a lot of advantage. I mean, my parents didn't worry about me because they said, you're the smart one, you could do, you know, and he was not. He could not. I mean, for a while, longest time, he couldn't talk. Not clearly enough to be understood. I mean, even as an adult, a lot of people could not understand him. He used sign language, which was not even easy to do for him. His sign language was pretty crude. A lot of people couldn't read his sign language either. So he had to make do with what he needed to make things work for him. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Paula, did you go to school at 6 to 8 in those areas, or did you stay home with your brother?
So I went to school. I went to school. Yeah, I excelled at school.
And who took care of him when you were in school?
He went to school too.
Oh, he went to school as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
My mom had to drive him to school because the nearest school that would take him was 15 miles away. So he didn't go to the same school that I went to
And
because
you
special
mentioned,
education, they didn't have special education in every school back in those days.
yeah. Well, I know that, you mentioned that when you were growing up, you kind of felt important by taking care of your brother. How did that materialize, I guess, as a young lady or young girl?
Well, I guess I did feel important. And my whole career was built around that, going into special education. Um, actually, when I decided I didn't want to be a speech therapist anymore, my initial thought was I want to go into business. I want to go into business school. I just wanted to divorce myself from the whole thing. But my parents were not happy about that. And because I was people pleasing, I wanted to make them happy. I wanted to do everything to mitigate pain that they felt. So we compromised and I went to school to be a teacher. And of course, special education, so I could help. And in my own mind, I was thinking, well, if I go into special education, then I can help other people not suffer all the same pains and anxiety and trauma that I went through. But that's not really how it works. So,
Well,
but it was a valiant try, I guess.
I think many of us who go through childhood trauma, we end up as adults trying to help people not have to go through the same thing that we went through.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
I think that becomes common for you. One of the questions I have here, Paula, is what are the most common relationship patterns you see in adults who grew up in this dynamic, especially around boundaries, people pleasing, responsibility?
Okay. Yeah. I think for relationship problems, people tend to get into, I think, more codependent kind of relationships because they don't have boundaries. They just don't have boundaries. And they tend to, with that people pleasing, they feel like they don't have any worth unless they are giving something to somebody. Okay. And so they give and they give and they give. And at first, that giving is appreciated. And they think, oh, she's such a nice person. She gives and she's helpful. But pretty soon in a relationship, that giving becomes an expectation, and the other person doesn't give in return. So it becomes very one-sided. And then you start to resent that, and they're still expecting you to give. And they get resentful if you don't give, and you get resentful for them expecting you to give. And there's not good communication. And like I said, there are no boundaries. And if you start to develop boundaries, they say, hey, what happened to you? You're not the same person. So, and if you don't have boundaries and you keep going without the boundaries, you burn out in the relationship. And at work, you burn out because you're still giving, giving, giving. And people keep giving you more stuff to do, and you don't say no, and you burn out. Or maybe you volunteer, because that's something we also like to do, is volunteer to help, right?
Yeah.
And then we volunteer and we get overloaded, and we never say no. And we just get burnt out on life and everything because we don't have a boundary to protect ourselves. And that's what all of our relationships look like.
Yeah. And the one thing, Paula, is that if you don't set boundaries, right, like you said, you just eventually burn out, and really it becomes part of like kind of a relationship with yourself, that you don't love yourself as the way that someone that can set healthy boundaries do.
That's right. Right.
So,
You don't have good self-image.
right. So, how do you, because, and then another thing is like you start loving yourself a little bit, and then all of a sudden you start setting boundaries, and some of your good friends say, oh, you're, like you said, you're not the same person. So then all
Right.
of a sudden they don't want to be friends with you any longer.
Right.
So it becomes, you know, you're like, well, maybe that doing things for other people is the only way I'm loved. So how do you help your clients understand that boundaries is what's going to make you love yourself and actually be more accountable for your life as you grow older, rather than, just keep doing the same things that will eventually get you burnt out and not liking yourself, like, like, because so many times, when you say, I'll help you with this, and in your mind you're going, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, but you do it anyway. So it becomes a circle. So look, tell us a little bit about how you can, once you start loving yourself and you keep that going, and you're okay with, some people, they are here for a season, right? And their season ends. How do you still love yourself and love other people when you find people that only loved you because you did something for them?
Well, I think you first have to learn before they start loving themselves, they have to go through a lot of steps. They have to understand that the whole situation that they're in was not their fault in the first place. That the reason they got into that situation was because they were coping with the trauma they went through. They were surviving. Everything we did, all that people pleasing, all the no boundaries, everything that we did was just a part of that whole complex myriad of behaviors that we developed to survive in our situation, to protect ourselves. Okay. And so when we go through all of these complex processes to learn to love ourselves, that requires, to have self-compassion. And to have self-compassion is very hard. It's not like flipping a switch. Oh, I'm going to love myself today. We have to learn self-compassion, which takes a really long time. Some people don't even understand what that means, to have self-compassion and to do self-care. So we have to go through all of those processes and to understand the emotions that we have and to really be able to identify the emotions that we're feeling. So when we go through all of those processes, by the time we get to that self-love piece, it's a little bit easier to understand why we let people go or why people let us go. And we can accept that and say, yeah, I see that. And it feels okay now. and we're ready to move on and expand our social circle to other people, people that we are, that see us for who we are, because we are seeing ourselves for who we are. When we see ourselves differently, other people will see us differently.
Right. I mean, and so many times as people with going through trauma, whether, you kind of like almost in an isolation scenario. Oh, you come home, you go to school, you come home. And so you're not good at, when you get older and as an adult, somebody says, do you want to go networking? Do you want to go to these special things? And you're like,
You don't.
right. So, and that also really kind of becomes a self-love thing, right? So how did you make that transition to get out into the world? Now you're coaching and you're involved in other things. How did you start making relationships and get yourself out of isolation? Because for me, when I decided I was going to grow, I isolated myself for 10 years, and that was a long time. How did you break that isolation pattern and get out and start doing things yourself?
I've got to say, I can't say I've 100% done that successfully yet. I'm still working on it. But I've made some great strides. I was married for 35 years.
Okay.
After I'd been married for about 30 years, I don't know, I think it was after my kids went off to school, after college. And of course, they were my whole life, pretty much. And I was living with my husband that I realized when we got married, we were very young. I went to school after college when I was 17. I mean, I got out of home, left home as soon as quickly as I could. It's like get out of Dodge, go leave. And so I got married young. And then when the kids went to college, I looked at this person I was married to, and I thought, I don't really, we don't have that much in common. You know, we had the kids in common. Um, and I just I started spending time in my head, I guess, trying to find things to do. And I was feeling very unsatisfied with myself. And I finally said, I think I need to see a therapist. So I went to somebody who actually did EMDR.
Mhm.
And in the process of that, something flipped in my head. And for many years, I had been saying I had a traumatic childhood. And at the time, it was kind of tongue in cheek because that, in fact, I had been through trauma. And even to this day, there are people in this world of psychology who will not say that people who are siblings of people with disabilities have trauma. They will say this people with this disability and their parents were the ones with the trauma. They don't recognize that the siblings of the people with disabilities were also involved in having trauma. This psychologist therapist did actually recognize that I had trauma, and she validated that for me. And then went through the EMDR process, and I said that switch was flipped, and I started to remember things and feel things, experience those feelings that had been bottled up for so long. And I realized that my marriage was not healthy. And I just started to say, I think something's not right. So I started looking for ways to do things differently for myself. And they didn't really align with what my husband wanted to do. So I eventually ended up getting a divorce and then started to try to branch out from there. Um, and started, looking for, I was still working as a teacher, but wanted to do more. Finally, and quit teaching and went into life coaching. And then I needed more therapy because the life coaching was a little triggering for me. So I thought, okay, I was feeling those feelings, those emotions were coming up again. So more therapy. And it was suggested that I look into coaching for trauma. And here I am. So
Well,
it's a slow process. It's a very slow process.
well, that's the one thing I think that, well, 5 years ago or 4 years ago, trauma wasn't really even talked about in society, but now it's become a big deal because I think that people realize that there's so many of us that experience, it can be little T or big T they call it, but so many of us have went through some big T trauma, and we put our masks on and we go out in the public and nobody knows what we've experienced. Everybody just thinks, wow, they're a nice person, or wow, they've got, they're good in this or they're good in that, because we kind of specialize in certain things. But the one thing I want to ask you, Paula, is when you got married, was your husband someone that you thought that you could take care of, and you ended up marrying him, and then you kind of outgrew that, so you outgrew the fact that you don't want to take care of him after that.
What's really interesting is that when we got married, no, he seemed very self-confident. Um, he had a real career path and ahead of him. So that was not the intention. I did not feel like I had to care for him at that time. I wanted to be a wife and a mother. I still wanted to teach, but I really wanted to have a family. I think I wanted to have like the model of what I didn't have, right? Although my parents were I mean, they loved each other, they cared for each other, they were in a good, solid relationship. All other things considered, they did pretty well for each other. But I guess I wanted the model family. Okay. But 2 years after we were married, my husband came down with a chronic, critical, lifelong illness. So I did end up taking care of him a lot. And I thought, here we go again.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh my goodness.
But I was really good at taking care of him. And eventually that, I think is part of that 30 plus years got going along. I mean, he still worked and everything, but there was just a lot of that caretaking that went through our marriage. And I think that was probably part of, as I uncovered stuff that was going on inside of me, I realized I was getting burned out because I didn't have the boundaries with the caretaking. And when I finally said, go get your own medicine, I don't have to go to the pharmacy for you, I realized I don't have to do that all. I need to draw boundaries. And that wasn't okay.
Well, I think that, we, as we grow, I mean, you were growing, and you started loving yourself more, and you realized that this fantasy marriage, or right, with a family and everything going, wasn't going to materialize. As most of the time, fantasies that we picture are not really real, right? There's something that we kind of dreamed up going through the trauma that we were in when we were kids. So, how did you? I guess I want to ask this question: when someone grows up with as the healthy sibling, how does that shape their identity as the roles they step into as adults? Because we're kind of talking about that right now, right? Is
Right.
you you needed to do something to the way that you looked at your current life.
Right. So,
Yeah, so you can just help people kind of understand that people are not going to make you get you a happy life until you realize that there is a happy life after that.
yeah, I think it helps to understand what's behind it all. When you recognize and see everything that's underneath it, that wasn't your fault. Man, that was all going on underneath that. It was all behind me. I dealt with all of that as a child. So I'm going to give you a list of all the things potentially are going on in the life of a sibling, of somebody with a disability. And just imagine a child dealing with all of this. Like we talked about the trauma, the neglect, the abandonment, the isolation, we talked about that. They may experience physical and emotional abuse because parents that have a disabled child sometimes are at their wits' end. So sometimes we see that physical abuse. The child, the healthy child, experiences also secondary trauma because they see their disabled sibling undergoing neglect and abuse, possibly from their parents, often from other people as well, that they're seeing. So this is weighing on that child. Okay. We talked about that loss of identity.
Yeah.
So they're building their identity on that family, based on that family. So that entire identity of that family is based around everything that sibling is able to do, that disabled sibling. So their schedule, their doctor's appointments, their therapy appointments, whether or not they can attend something or cannot attend something. That entire family space is around that disabled child. And the other siblings have to just go along for the ride. So they build their life and expectation around that. So their friend groups, all of their livelihood, everything is built around that as they grow up. Okay. So that carries over their career choices, their choice of friends. Will my friends accept this brother or sister? Will the person I marry accept this brother or sister? So that narrows down their choice of they don't have a wide variety of people to pick. They maybe only could pick a few people who might be able to accept that sibling into the family. Okay. And then that sibling will be with them for the rest of their lives, like it or not. If you think of siblings, typical siblings, if you'd say any old brother or sister, when they grow up, they get married, they go off to college, get married, they may live across the country from each other, see each other at holidays, call each other when they want to talk, everything's fine. But this sibling, whether the healthy sibling likes it or not, their parents probably expect them to care for this sibling, disabled sibling, after the parents are gone. They're not always asked permission. Will you care for this sibling after we're gone? It's an expectation. So it's like a lifelong sentence, not a relationship with your sibling. So they carry that around with them. Add that to the bag. It's like carrying a bag. It's a heavy bag, and they're carrying, just put more things in it. Okay. So for their future planning of their life, where they live, all of that is all hinged on this sibling. Okay. So there are so many things that they carry along with them. They also fear about having children. So many wonder, am I going to have a child that's like my brother or sister? So they may choose not to have children, or they may have, now that genetic testing is available, they may do that first before they decide to jump in and have kids.
Yeah, that's the one thing that, we don't think about, that sibling now is, like you're saying, is a lifelong person that's in your life for as long as they're still alive. And,
Exactly.
and I think that, that's the one thing, even like, growing up in childhood trauma, both of us can end up, you know, damaged, obviously, and going through the trauma. It always amazes me how two people can live in the same house and do totally different things. But at least for us, you're like I said, my sister, she goes and gets married. She's done other things in her life, so it wasn't someone that I had to keep to stay going with for
Exactly.
I got out. So that's kind of a a thing I don't think that many people realize. And that
Right.
when you were saying that, it's like, oh wow.
Yeah. And it could be, it's an emotional and can possibly financial burden for the rest of their lives.
Where's your brother today?
My brother passed away.
Did he, and how long? How old was that? And how long was he with you during that time?
He actually wasn't with me when my parents were really smart and really, and well, actually, one of the good things about me going into special ed is some of the classes I took helped me to see, yeah, we've got to do something about his future. So I talked to them and I said, look, we got to make some decisions. And they listened. I was so grateful because I hear so many stories today about parents who don't listen and they don't make plans. So when I graduated from college, I helped my parents find a place for my brother to go. It took a few years to get that nailed down. He finally ended up, I think he must have been about 24 or 25, and he ended up in a facility and he stayed there for the rest of his life. And it was a wonderful place. And it was the perfect place for him. And that's the place where that's where he ended his last years there. He had congestive heart failure and he died unexpectedly when he was 59.
And my mother was in a car accident, and I'm gonna kind of go through this just based on my experience there. Is that you know people expect you to act a certain way, and I had a very hard time of crying. I had a very hard time of just kind of you know accepting that this is something bad that's happened to me. How did you deal with it when your brother passed away? Is that did you look at it as relief, or did how did you look at it?
I would say it was mixed feelings. My dad had passed away a year prior. So my dad passed away in 2017. My brother passed away in 2018 and or 19. I don't now I'm losing my years. But anyway, he was 59. So I guess it was 19. Um, but part of me felt relief, but because he was really not actually a financial or emotional burden on me anymore. I mean, all I did was go visit him. I would just drive 4 hours to visit him 2 or 3 times a year. It wasn't a burden. That really was not a burden. But
Well,
his health was declining considerably. And that was a worry. That was a worry. But when he died, so many things happened to me. I was in depression for a good year. I relived all of the things that happened as a child. My mind just regurgitated all those things that happened. And I think it was because so many people said, oh, he was such a wonderful, I mean, we loved him, we loved him, we loved him. And so many people did, but they didn't really know the backstory, the full backstory. I mean, they knew he had severe behavior problems, but I don't think they knew the full extent of what happened. And it just really hit me hard as I kind of relived all of that and felt guilty about reliving that and felt guilty about maybe not fully embracing all of that. Oh, we loved him. He was so wonderful. And I'm just being like, yeah, he was so wonderful. Well, sometimes he was. He wasn't to me, but okay. you know, I felt really guilty. And um, maybe again, that was where I was feeling unseen. Um, we didn't talk about glass children yet, but siblings, people with disabilities are called glass children because they go unseen and unnoticed. And maybe that was where I was feeling unseen and unnoticed because, or maybe just revived my feeling of being unseen and unnoticed because it always seemed like even when he was being who he was, and he was very loving when he wanted to be loving, when he was not being loving, and it was very difficult, he got a pass because he doesn't know better, or so they thought. And I was supposed to suck it up because I was smart and I knew better and it was okay for, I was supposed to just take it on and say, don't worry about it. Just accept it.
Well, I mean, when people say, oh, like, and we're talking about, we can all look at a situation unless we're actually experiencing it.
Mm,
We can't feel the emotion. We can't feel
exactly.
the pain and things that you're kind of going through. And when somebody says, "Oh, he's so nice," and you say, "Yeah, he used to trace me around with rodents." How nice is he, right? So all of those things kind of go through your mind, and I can understand how you know once you kind of get around, it's like you start feeling a little bit guilty. You start feeling a little bit, shameful of some of these thoughts that go through your mind.
And especially when, we're never supposed to speak ill of the dead, right? So he had just died, and then all of these things come back to me. And I think that's really common for people who have had like parents who were abusers, and then the abusers die, their parents die, and then they're like, I don't know how to feel about this, right? And so even though I loved my brother, I did love my brother, and I did much to care for him. I always had that part of me that was terrified of him and felt a lot of anger about how he treated me. And it was never really effectively dealt with. And it was because nobody knew what to do and nobody had the resources to deal with it. So I learned to um, understand that the people in charge, my parents mainly, may have been able to do better, but they didn't know how. And they didn't have anybody to look to get the answers. So they did the best they could with the resources that they had, which were very few, basically none.
Well, I mean, a couple of things is one is in our childhood we learn how to be safe in situations, right? So you learned through everything that was happening, how that in this particular instance I can be safe. And whether your parents actually go into it, because the one thing about parents, nobody is given a manual that says,
Right.
here you go.
Exactly.
You're going to have with the disabled child, this is everything that kind of goes with it. And so everybody just kind of learns on their own.
Exactly.
You had another brother that was like that, right? You guys are, oh, okay, this is that way we do things. But unfortunately, your parents can make choices, but you can't make choices. You're here, and this is what your responsibility is. And this is the way that you do things, and that's the way that we transform our minds at that time, because we don't really know what to do. We can't say anything about it. We just accept it. And then, like you said, when things happen when we're older, we don't even know how to react or respond to certain situations, because the thing that we learned as kids is not the way that we would have learned if we would have been in an emotionally stable family.
That's right. And the things that we learn to cope with, that we use to cope with it when we're a child, if we still use that same coping mechanism, and we usually do, we carry that coping mechanism into our adulthood. It doesn't work when we're adults. It's unhealthy when we're adults. So those coping mechanisms as children don't transfer well into adults.
Yeah, and that's the one thing, Paula, I always, and I do this through this son in the videos as well. But if you've experienced a childhood trauma when you're growing up, like you say, most people don't realize that they have childhood trauma when they're as adults. So we go around doing things that we normally we think is normal. And I think that what society needs to understand is that a lot of the things that we do and that we have, like my relationship with money is would have been different if I'd had people that around me that taught me about money that we didn't really have money either. So it was like I had no idea how to take care, how to do money when I became an adult. And so many times we get into situations where like in a leadership position when you get a job and you're a people pleaser, or you're you're somebody that just works all the time, you end up not making the right decisions, right? And until you deal with those decisions that you're making and start making right decisions, you end up staying stuck in that certain area. And I think, Paula, that if you look at coming to you in those situations is an act of self-love, right? I'm gonna get help and actually pay money to get myself to a new level. When you deal with some things like that, how do you let people, and I guess the one thing is, how do you come across with people that they can be totally honest with you? And, most of that time, those types of things are kind of letting them know that you went through it as well, right? So how do you go turn your clients into people that can just really kind of open up to you? Because the one thing that I've said through the summit is that when someone finds that person that they know that won't give up on them and believes in them, that's when their world changes. So how do you
Right.
become that person that comes to you and says, "Look, Paula, this is went through was with my childhood with my sibling, and 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 they don't really, people come to you probably and they're not trusting. They don't know that you've experienced the life you've experienced. How do you come across that so you can give them the support and love that they need?"
Well, first of all, you have to be able to listen without judgment. I mean, people come and they talk and they need a safe, non-judgmental space to unload their burden, right? I have to be that safe person that's not going to judge them or tell them they did something wrong. I'm not going to tell them that. Okay. I'm going to attune to them. I'm going to hear them. I'm going to validate their experience. I'm going to say, yeah, I get that. That happened to you. I understand. I hear what you're saying because that's true and it's real. And we can't, we don't put trauma like on a scale. Nobody's trauma is worse than anybody's trauma. Trauma is real to you. Your trauma is as real to you as anybody's trauma is to them. So I have to validate that their trauma is real because it is. Absolutely. And I need to make sure that they understand that it wasn't their fault. Because whatever happens to us as children, like you said, we have no choice. It's not our fault. We're living in a house provided for us. The food is provided for us by our parents. And what happens at their choice is not our choice, right? So we just live there. So nothing that happened was our choice. And everything that we did in response was our brain's ability to survive. Like I said, the coping mechanisms, everything that we do in response to what happened to us was our attempt to survive the situation we're in. Okay. And so, with that understanding that we were just trying to survive, that really opens up a whole world of understanding right there. So, we talk about that. And when they see that, when people see that and start to understand, it was just an automatic response. All those things are automatic responses. I didn't do that on purpose. Just that psychoeducation of understanding how the brain works, why it works that way, and knowing that we can uncover things in a safe place. We start to look at emotions, start to feel things, start to experience things, and then they start having those show moments, those light bulbs, and we celebrate together and start peeling away those layers. And it's wonderful. And I let them know your feelings are okay. You don't have to feel ashamed about feeling ashamed. You don't have to feel ashamed about guilt or anxiety or anger. Go ahead and be angry. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's healthy. You should feel angry. Go ahead and express it. Because without anger, you wouldn't know how to feel joy. If you don't express those things, you don't experience life in its fullest if you don't express your emotions. So go ahead, do it. So that's
Well,
what we do.
the when someone is going through the trauma and are going through life really, and they don't really know that they've experienced trauma, but they just can't figure out why I keep in the same spot, right? You go in a circle and you go in a circle and you think you're making progress, and then all of a sudden you're triggered and you're back in the same spot. How do you how do people then start loving themselves enough to say, I don't want to keep in the same circle over and over and over. Because the one thing that we know is that until we love ourselves, life is not going to be that as good as it could be, because we
Right.
can only love others as much as we love ourselves. So our husbands and our children and everything, even though we show love, but many times love is mask, right? We do it
Absolutely.
through people pleasing. We do it through just continuously pleasing people. What is that first step, Paula, that when someone calls you and you can say, look, I can help you, and even before you come to see me, here's some things that you can do to start loving yourself so that you can make progress. How do you handle those types of things?
Well, I actually, the first thing that I want people to do um, is to usually the first thing we work on is is understanding emotions, is just being aware. Awareness is so critical because we walk through life and we're just blind to everything. We just go through the motions. We're not aware of how we feel at all. We don't know sadness from happiness. I mean, we just keep going through life, kind of in a dull state, really. Very dull affect. Just we don't have all those the joy, the happiness, the sadness. It just is very flattened out. Um, but the most important thing people can do, I think, for themselves is to have self-compassion. As I told you earlier, people don't really understand it. It's all part of a complex process. So it's not just one thing. So we have to work on the emotions. We have to work on self-compassion. Um, we have to work on talking to that little child inside, reaching this reparenting. We work on self-parenting ourselves. So we talk to that little child inside and say, it's okay, I'm here for you. Maybe your mom and dad weren't there. Maybe mom and dad weren't there when we needed them. You know, because as children, we need co-regulation from our parents. There was, I think when I was about that age, or maybe before, I don't remember exactly when that was, from a time frame, but there was a period of time when psychologists used to say, just let the infant self soothe, let them cry it out, and they'll learn to soothe themselves. That's hogwash. We need the co-regulation of our parents or caregivers because we learn regulation from their nervous system. by connecting with their nervous system. That's how we learn to co-regulate. We need the nervous system of another live being to learn to co-regulate and soothe our own nervous system. That's how infants learn it. And if we didn't learn it then, we got to learn it now, right? So we learn it from other people. So I can help with that. Even through Zoom, we can do it. But you have to learn to co-regulate, have to learn to soothe your nervous system. Okay. You can do it with your pets. You co-regulate with your cat if you want to. It helps. But yeah, so we work on things like that. So to just say one thing on your own, if you can identify your emotions, again, that is something that needs some support for that usually. If you work on self-compassion, self-care, self-care is critical. And I don't mean just taking a bubble bath.
Yeah.
But setting boundaries, super important. That's part of self-care. Learning to say no. Learning to sleep properly. Get to sleep at night. So sleep hygiene, we would call it sleep hygiene, things like that. Eating properly, getting exercise, getting some of that. We have a buildup of cortisol in our body. All that stress we've been carrying around for most of our lives is part of the trauma. So let's move that cortisol out of our body. Go exercise and get that out of your system. And then we need to calm down, do something that is calming for you to help you soothe. And that doesn't mean go have a drink at the bar. That means, do something soothing for your system, like a massage, or use some soothing, I use, I can pull it out right here. I think you could. I don't know where I got it. I don't have it with me. Oh, I do. Like stress balls, or those bouncy sit that you sit on, or yoga maybe, or something that could soothe your system, right?
Well,
So
it's a
breathing,
process,
it's
right?
a big process. It's not just simply flip the switch and do this thing and it's all going to be better,
And
but
so
it's not
many,
something you have to do alone.
right? And that's the one thing I want to bring out. When there are processes that go along, I mean, people can give themselves 5 things to do in a day,
Right.
and they'll miss 3 of them, right? Because they get busy. And if you get too busy to learn to be the person that you love and that you want to become, then you end up in life, just not the person that you want to be. And the one last question I want to ask you before we move on is this. When you become that caregiver, right? So you're Paula the caregiver. You're Paula the person that pleases people, and you're Paula that do this. How do you become Paula, the one that I love, the person that can do these things if I want to, but I'm really today you're Paula. How do you become that person?
Through a long process that I just talked about right a minute ago. It started with just going through all of those things. And um, I've been through like all the exercises of doing working out the cortisol. I mean, I don't work out as much as I should, and don't should all over yourself either. That's not good.
Yeah.
Give yourself a break. Give yourself that self-compassion. If you don't get things done, say, it's okay. I did as good as I could today. I'll do better next time. Right. Um, but try to focus on doing what you can do, but don't beat yourself up for not being able to do it all. Right.
Yeah.
Have self-compassion, self-care, self try to get your cortisol level down, try to calm yourself, and sleep. I have to say, sleep has been a real game changer for me. That's been very big.
They say if you don't get at least 7 hours worth of sleep in a night, right, it's going to damage really your health over time. So you need to really make sure that you get enough sleep for sure. Well, Paul, I want to thank you so much because I think this is a part of trauma that a lot of people don't understand or not don't hear about, right? Because most of it is we're just in this unhealthy environment. But when you get
Right.
into a situation like you were in and other people are in where you're you're in even more of a situation that you can have a narcissist mother and father but still have a disabled sibling, right?
Absolutely.
There are a lot
And
of things that they just kind of add on to the burden, and people just
exactly.
don't.
And I've heard of many people in that same situation, which multiplies the issue for people, makes it just that much harder. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so people just have to understand really that they kind of need help. So,
Yeah.
Paul, if someone connects with you and they're like, well, because the one thing I try to get to into people is that you can get a coach, but unless they've really experienced what you've experienced, they're not going to get you where you want to go because the one thing, and this is one of my favorite sayings, is you can't take somebody or get somebody to a place where you've never been. So you have to, because people can say, "Oh, I'm a life coach. I can help you. I've read 3 books and I think I can help you." But unless you really went through the trauma that you went through, that I went through, you can't really help someone. So tell people how they can get a hold of you so that they can move on in their lives with the help of somebody that's already been there.
Okay. Well, my website is www.siblingcoach.com.
We'll write it on the screen in a minute. So,
Okay. All right. Yeah.
so the best way to
And
get a hold of you is through your website.
well, yeah. And if they can't contact me through my website, or I'm on Facebook too. That's another way they can message me on Facebook as well.
Great. Well, Paula, thank you so much. Like I said,
Thank
just
you.
for me doing this interview with you, I just see all the different approaches that you would need coming from a situation where not only did you have a traumatic childhood, which a lot of us do, but you end up with a traumatic childhood with a sibling that you have to take care of. It's all right to take care of yourself in a safe situation, but to also duplicate that as a child is just something that really kind of boggles my thought process. So I know people are going to look for your help. And I thank you so much for bringing that to our attention and realizing that we can all go through stuff, right? But some
Yes.
things are just more monumental than others. But the one thing about our minds and our bodies and growing in relationships is that you can overcome them if you just set your mind to it and get around people that can help you. So thank you
You
so
absolutely
much,
can.
Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's my
Okay.
pleasure.